At this point, you should already know the theorems used to prove that two triangles are congruent and be able to identify whether or not triangles are congruent. So in this video, we are proving that triangles are congruent. So in this, I have an example of Sss theorem. That means you know all three sides, and the sides are denoted with hash marks or tick marks. And notice that the middle side BD here does not have any tick marks. Well, BD is going to be congruent to itself, and I'll explain that in a minute. Overall, this is the format of the flowchart proof, and I would go through and to help you prove these, I would put SSS at the top so that way you remember what goes in the bubbles. So in the first bubble, I'm just going to pick a side. So I picked AD is congruent to BC, and that's because it was given. So in each bubble, you have to have a statement and then a reason. And AD is going to be congruent to BC because they both have one hash mark. The next side is AB is congruent to DC. Those both have two hash marks, and that was given also. And then the last side, BD is going to be congruent to BD, and this has a special name. It's going to be congruent to itself, and so when you have something that's congruent to itself, it's called reflexive property. And so that leads down to our conclusion, our final bubble at the bottom here, that triangle DAB is going to be congruent to triangle BCD. And notice my ordering here. I just picked an ordering for the first triangle DAB, but then I made sure I matched up my corresponding sides with my corresponding sides. And so I went from one hash mark to two hash marks. So I got to do the same thing here, one hash mark to two hash marks, so BCD. And then they are congruent because of SSS, and that would be how you would prove this. Next, I'm going to do an example of a side angle side. So I'm going to put SAS at the top of my bubbles, and I'm just going to name my sides. AB is going to be congruent to BC because they both have two hash marks, and I know that because it was given. And then my angles that are congruent are angle ABD is congruent to angle CBD. I have to use three letters here because my triangles are connected in order to name this angle. And make sure that you use congruent symbol here and the angle symbol here, and make sure that B is in the middle of both of these. And we know that they're congruent because it was also given by the arcs. Each of them had one arc. And then the last side that's going to be congruent is BD is going to be congruent to itself, and recall that we call that reflexive property. Now this is a side angle side because we know two sides and then the angle in the middle of those two sides, so that's why it's side angle side. And so therefore this leads down to our conclusion that triangle DAB is congruent to triangle DCB. DAB, notice my ordering, I went from the outer blank side into the two hash marks, so that's what I'm going to do here, DCB, so that's why I did the ordering that way. And they're congruent because of SAS. Next, I'm going to do an angle side angle example. So I'm going to put ASA at the top so that I remember and I don't get myself confused here. So in the first bubble, I'm going to put that angle A is congruent to angle Z. They both have one arc, and that was given to us. That's how we knew that it was congruent. They were congruent. And then I'm going to put the side in there. AX is congruent to XZ. I know that because that was also given. They both have one tick mark or hash mark. And then angle AXB is going to be congruent to angle YXZ, and I know that because they are vertical angles. So once again, make sure your bubbles have a statement and then the reason for that. Those are all important. and make sure you have the correct symbols here. And then those reasons bubbles lead to the conclusion bubble, which is right here, that triangle BAX is congruent to triangle YZX. So make sure all your corresponding angles and sides match up. And so I went from, so angle B would go with angle Y, and A goes with Z, and then X is going to go with X. And those two triangles are congruent because of ASA. Next, we're going to do an example of an angle-angle side. Angle-angle side is when you know two angles, and then the side is not in between the two angles. And so all I'm going to do here is just name my angles that are congruent and then name the side that's congruent. So my first bubble, angle A is congruent to angle Y. They both have two arcs, and so that's why they're congruent to each other, and we know that because they were given. And then angle E is going to be congruent to angle X, and they both have one arc, and they were given to us. Notice here I didn't have to use 3 letters to name my angles because the triangles are not connected, so it's clear to me what angles are what. And then side AB is going to be congruent to side YZ, and that was also given. They both had one hash mark. And then that's going to lead down to our conclusion that triangle BAE is congruent to triangle ZYX. Make sure your corresponding sides match up and your corresponding angles match up. And B would go with angle Z, A goes with angle Y, and E goes with angle X. And then they are congruent because of angle-angle side. And our final example is HL, which stands for hypotenuse leg. You can only have hypotenuse leg when you have right triangles, so make sure that you have right triangles, and notice that in HL you don't have as many bubbles. You only need 2 bubbles at the top, and then I'm going to put HL at the top. H stands for hypotenuse, so my hypotenuse is AB is congruent to GM, and we know that because they both have 3 tick marks or hash marks, and we know it because it was given to us. And then the leg is BC, or CB is congruent to side GE, and we know that because they both have 2 hash marks or 2 tick marks, and that was also given. So therefore, triangle ABC is going to be congruent to triangle MGE. And so I started with, to do that, I started with ABC, which went from 3 hash marks to 2 hash marks, so that's why I go MGE that order. And then you put in why those 2 triangles are congruent, and it's because of HL.